This week on YCN Vermont Wrap, we'll take a look at a few of the top news stories from the past week, and then we'll have a frank discussion about the ethics of politicking. When you're vying for political office, it's generally a good idea to not make enemies out of the people who are volunteering for your campaign. We'll speak with one person involved in a state gubernatorial race who just got burned by Team Stern, and why she's now campaigning for the pro-gun Democrat running as the write-in candidate. And on this week's Political Potpourri, we'll have a stern discussion about one campaign that's literally going off the rails. YCN Vermont Wrap is on now. Come on, let's go have some fun. Welcome back to YCN Vermont Wrap. I'm Keith Hanson. Vermont Tax Commissioner Cash Sampson is biting the bullet this week after having mailed out approximately 4,500 tax bills containing either the wrong tax rate or failing to include a property tax adjustment. Residents of the Green Mountain State are being urged to examine their tax bills closely to ensure that they do not contain any errors. According to an Associated Press report, approximately 70 municipalities sent out their tax bills on the 1st of July. The issue is reported to be involving mostly incorrect homestead declarations. Sampson went on to say that the corrected bills will be sent out before the end of July. And when they're after your money, you can trust them to not make a mistake. Attorneys for Jack Sawyer, the 18-year-old who stands accused of plotting a mass shooting at his former high school, have petitioned the court to move the now reduced misdemeanor charges of criminal threatening and carrying a deadly weapon with the intent of harming another person moved to family court, where they'll seek a change of status to youthful offender. You may recall that earlier this year, Vermont's state Supreme Court ruled that preparation alone did not constitute attempted murder, resulting in those felony charges against Sawyer being dropped. The county prosecutor in the case says she opposes granting Sawyer the youthful offender status. What has not been dropped, however, are the draconian and senseless knee-jerk reactionary gun laws that were hastily drafted up and signed into law by Governor Phil Scott. Now, for those of you that are keeping score at home, here's the play-by-play. Whack job plots to shoot up a school. Plot to shoot up school is uncovered. Governor of the state is informed about whack job's thwarted plot. Governor shows weakened resolve on Second Amendment issues. Progressives see weakness and opportunity to exploit said weaknesses of governor to advance their progressive anti-gun agenda. Governor capitulates to anti-gun progressives. Law-abiding citizens get screwed. Whack job is provided a public defender at taxpayers' expense. Public defenders exploit weaknesses in the state's criminal justice system to get whack job off on nothing more than misdemeanor slaps on the wrist. Progressive and unconstitutional anti-gun laws stay on the books. Law-abiding citizens continue to pay the penalty while whack job gets off essentially, and pardon the pun, scot-free. The Democratic Party in the state of Vermont has a new Führer. Josh Massey kicked off his new stint as the party's executive director this past Monday, with less than 1 month to go before the state's primary elections. Massey has previous experience in the perpetration and propagation of progressive ideologies, having worked for the state party previously and having been employed by the State Employees Association. Massey declined to comment on specific plans for the upcoming elections, instead saying he wanted to settle into his new position first. He went on to say that he brings with him, quote, personal passion and the fresh energy I think we need. No doubt that the phrase personal passion translates into white guilt and wealth envy, while the phrase the fresh energy translates into spite and enmity for the old guards of the Democratic Party, with a fresh focus on the tired rhetorical blatherings of the Democratic Socialist parasites like Bernie and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And speaking of Bernie and Alexandria, old man Sanders has once again abandoned working for the people of the state of Vermont, choosing instead to accept a salary as a United States Senator while bouncing around the country with Ocasio-Cortez, spreading the tired and worn-out message that the 1% is evil and oppressing the other 99%, blah, blah, blah. You know, that old chestnut. That inane message that resonates with the 20-something basement dwellers who want $15 per hour minimum wages so they can finally whittle down the $200,000+ they owe on that useless gender studies degree. You know, those stellar performers. Well, this Friday, the 76-year-old professional couch server and his progressive arm candy, 28-year-old Ocasio-Cortez, descended upon the state of Kansas, a state which, incidentally, Trump won by right around 20 percentage points. while trying to tell the residents of America's heartland that wealth confiscation and redistribution can work wonders for the breadbasket of our nation. Unlike Venezuela, where people are considered fortunate if their diet includes rat protein. Remember earlier when we talked about wealth envy? Well, here's Bernie's motivator. He wants to destroy anyone who's successful because he and his life have been an abject failure. Here's a guy whose first wife left him after he suckered her into marriage, then moved her into a rundown sugar shack with a dirt floor. After she dumped him like the next day aftermath of a chili eating contest, he went on to father a bastard child while living dead broke. When his attempts to swing a hammer failed, he resorted to writing freelance articles involving masturbation and rape fantasies for any leftist rag that would acknowledge his existence, in a vain attempt to keep the electricity on and the gas in the Volkswagen Beetle. Now there's the guy you want in charge of your nation's economy. When YCN Vermont Wrap returns, we're going to White River Junction, where we'll speak with Carlene Griggs Smith, a former Keith Stern for Governor campaign volunteer. Formerly, Carlene had a first-class seat on the Stern train. We'll find out what caused her to abandon that initiative and begin campaigning not only for another candidate, but for a member of the Democratic Party. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to YCN Vermont Wrap. I'm Keith Hanson. This past weekend, Republican gubernatorial candidate Keith Stern held a campaign fundraising barbecue and meet and greet in the town of Plainfield. Hot dogs, hamburgers, a Republican candidate there to deliver an impassioned speech that motivates and rallies the base, an AR-15 raffle. Sounds like a perfect day. Well, what could possibly go wrong? Lots. Joining me from White River Junction is a woman who served as a host of that event, Carlene Griggs Smith. Carlene, thank you so much for joining me on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Carlene, as I recall seeing on Facebook, you've been a pretty vocal supporter of Keith Stern, at least up until this point. Is that correct?
Yes, I have been.
And you served as a host for a campaign fundraiser last weekend in Plainfield. Tell me more about that event.
We were able to get a location that had plenty of parking, plenty of access to enjoyment. We had things added to it. There was supposed to be a bounce house. The car he sponsors was supposed to be there. And the other people who hosted the barbecue have a huge following for their gun shops. So we figured what better way to get the word out, because people up there didn't know who Keith was.
Mm-hmm. How did you first hear about Keith Stern and his campaign for governor?
I'm friends with his daughter, and she told me about it. And when he announced, I went on, looked it up a little bit, and I figured we got to beat Phil Scott. We got to have somebody. Mm-hmm.
So you offered to serve as a host for this campaign fundraiser. So it was going to be a barbecue. There was going to be an AR-15 sporting rifle that was going to be raffled off, and that took place this past Saturday. Where did things start to go wrong?
Well, pretty much Friday. We had to go down, and the other host, we says, we'd been working all day to finish the painting, get the place look really nice. Because they take pride in their property. Mm-hmm. And we had to pick up the meat, which Keith did, his campaign actually did pay for. That wasn't something we paid for out of any of our pockets. We went down to pick that up. We had 2 girls coming, and we had a set time to pick up tables and chairs from the local fire station. Her and I the other host and I didn't get back till about 4:15, and the person in charge of picking up the tables and bringing the grills were still in the back of the truck, and she was waiting for me to get there. And that's not a good thing, because the guy, of course, had been at the fire station already waiting 15 minutes for somebody to come pick up the tables. I mean, he took time out of his schedule to open the fire station so we could use the tables. Mm-hmm. And so we rushed around. We got down there, but in the meantime, the guy, he didn't know what was going on, so he made a call to the other couple hosts that hosted it and was not happy and gave them a hard time. And it's kind of like, well, that's really kind of a turnoff that, things couldn't have gone a little smoother.
Who was present there? Was it were there any representatives from the campaign there?
Yeah, his campaign manager, Becca Bailey, was there. She brought her grills and she was in charge of getting the tables and chairs.
Okay.
So we were able to get tables, chairs, we got set up. She did not come Saturday because she had a campaign thing of her own, which was fine. We got it set up, it went off without a hitch. The last probably 15, 20 minutes, we got totally drenched, but that was all good. A lot of people helped us pack up because it was wet. I went home for the night. At that point on Friday, the tables were scheduled to be returned on Monday night at 4 o'clock. I was exhausted at that point when I left Saturday, and I was pretty tired Friday, and Becca says, I'll return the tables at 4 o'clock Monday. Okay. All's good, figure everything's scheduled, it's all good. I went home, figured I'm going to take Sunday, I'm going to relax. That kind of didn't happen. First of all, my mother is battling stage 4 cancer. I hadn't talked to her Friday or Saturday because of the barbecue. I went on Facebook looking to see when she came on last and discovered it had been 20 hours. So nerves started getting us. We're like, okay, where is she? Because it's not like her not to at least check in every couple hours. And in the meantime, while I was worrying about that, I got a message that, oh, I can't return the tables.
That message, like, what? That message was from who?
From Becca.
From Becca, okay.
And she couldn't do them at that time. And I said, well, you need to call this guy and schedule to get them back. Because, and at that point, I told her what I was going through already. So my stress level was kind of through the roof. And that didn't help. I'm assuming everything's good. She talked to him maybe. She was returning the tables, only to find out they were left outside the fire station beside the building. And I'm like, and she had sent me a message by then, which I hadn't seen till after. That's how I found out about it. And she said, I'm sick. I left them there, and I'm sick of dealing with them. And I'm thinking, oh boy, this is not good. And of course, I got upset. We put a call into Keith and said, you need to deal with this. You know, we have too much on our plates right now. You have to deal with this and get, you know. And he got back to us later and said, yeah, well, I called the guy finally and apologized to him and said, and he was fine where things were left. And at that point, I finally just said to my husband, I says, this campaign is being run poorly. I need to step back. I need to, and I told Keith, I said, I can't do it anymore. I can't be put in these situations. And Keith and I haven't spoken since.
We need to take a quick break. More of my discussion with Carlene Griggs Smith when YCN Vermont Wrap continues. Welcome back to YCN Vermont Wrap. I'm Keith Hanson. Joining me from White River Junction is former Keith Stern for Vermont Governor campaign volunteer Carlene Griggs Smith. Carlene, thank you again for coming on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Carlene, how much money did you spend out of pocket on materials and supplies for Keith Stern's campaign?
I would guess 150, maybe a little more. I'll be honest with you, I didn't keep track of it.
Okay.
I bought a bunch of little things over time, so we had them because we knew over a month ahead of time we were doing the barbecue. I think our biggest outlay was printer cartridges and flyers, and Becca had said she'd do them, but I was already kind of like wondering if they would get done, so we took it upon ourselves, not asked by Keith or anything. We did that purely on our own. So that it was done.
150 or about, that was money that was in essence a campaign donation from you to the campaign. Were you expecting to be compensated for that or reimbursed for that?
No, not at all.
Okay. Now, when you and I first spoke, you were pretty upset about this. Upset to the point where not only were you disgusted with what happened, but you're actually now seeking to campaign for one of the competitors, the Democratic write-in candidate, John Rogers.
Yes, I've been able to finally watch some of his videos, and I'm not going to campaign hard for him. I'm just going to say at this point that's probably who I'm looking to vote for.
So what is it about this situation that maybe made you take a second look at Stern's campaign and say, maybe this isn't the person that should be sitting in the governor's chair?
Well, I think Keith deserves to be sitting in the campaign chair, but his campaign is just so poorly organized some points, and he doesn't know it. I mean, he had no clue what was going on. And some of that being my fault and some of it not. I didn't tell him every move we were making because I knew he was busy. And I figure, okay, we can deal with this, we can get it good, and then he can enjoy himself while he's doing his other stuff. But it's not the first time he's heard his campaign manager really needs to go.
Carlene, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for right now, but I want to thank you very much. Carlene Griggs Smith from White River Junction, thank you for coming on the YCN Vermont Wrap program.
Thank you.
When YCN Vermont Wrap returns, we'll take a closer look at the Stern campaign train wreck in this week's political potpourri section. Plus, we'll reach into the mailbag from the previous week. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to YCN Vermont Wrap. In this week's edition of Political Potpourri, I had budgeted the time and the interview time as well to speak with Republican gubernatorial candidate Keith Stern. As you can see, he's not here. And as you may recall, I've had preliminary discussions with Democratic write-in candidate John Rogers and independent candidate Joe Barney. Now, I'm willing to give each and every candidate equal airtime to discuss the issues that they feel are most important to them, and for me to pose to them the questions that I know voters of the state want to have answered. I've always maintained an equal opportunity approach to my broadcasting. On the 3rd of July, I sent a certified letter, return receipt requested, addressed to Keith Stern at the business he co-owns with his wife, Stern's Quality Produce. They're located in White River Junction. The letter was signed for on the morning of July 11th. In that letter, I wrote, in part, and I quote myself, "Kindly consider this formal written correspondence as your official invitation to appear on my weekly television news and commentary program, YCN Vermont Wrap, which broadcasts throughout the entire state of Vermont on the YCN network. You, or whoever is now handling your communications and social media presence, have chosen to block my personal and professional accounts from seeing or interacting with your social media profiles, so I am left with no choice but to formalize the invitation in this manner. As I'm sure you are aware, numerous individuals have pushed for a write-in campaign on behalf of Senator John Rogers, a Democrat, and Joe Barney, an independent, both of whom have been featured guests on the interview portion of my program. I extend to you your opportunity for your equal time. Should you wish to accept this formal written invitation, kindly reach out to me directly via my email, and we can set up a time and location to film your segment." Now, as I've stated many times before, I tape this program on Friday afternoons. So currently, it's 3:30 in the afternoon on Friday, the 20th of July. Mr. Stern and members of his campaign team have had over 1 week to reach out to me and reply to my correspondence. Nobody has. You'll also note that in the letter, I reference the fact that I have been blocked, literally blocked, from all of Keith Stern's social media accounts by his current campaign manager, Rebecca Bailey, or Becca, as she likes to be called. Now, I've told you regularly that I will always tell you the truth, and that I will never lie to you, and I will never lead you down the path of falsehoods. It is because of this guiding principle that I must disclose to you that between October and the middle of December of 2017, I was contractually retained by Keith Stern to provide to him consultation services and serve as an interim campaign manager to assist him in getting his gubernatorial run off the ground. Now, up until this point, I have not mentioned Keith Stern's name once, with the exception of a 45-minute interview that I conducted with him in July of last year, going back at least until the 1st of January of this year. On radio alone, I have broadcast over 560 hours of radio programming, and not once have I mentioned Keith Stern's name publicly or on the airwaves, either television or radio, until now. And as someone who regularly interviews state-level and national political figures, I can tell you one thing with absolute certainty. Keith Stern's train is derailing. His campaign, and whatever slim chances it had of surviving a state's primary, is being driven into the ground on a 45-degree angle by two politically incompetent individuals who appear more concerned about their own state representative races in the state of New Hampshire than looking out for the best interests of a man who is literally draining his bank account to pay them for services he's clearly not receiving. Now, I've gotten to know Keith Stern as a person and not as a candidate. And Keith is a genuinely nice man who I believe wants the best for his country. He works hard in his business, and I do believe that the man has principles. But this man is not capable of being governor of the state of Vermont. And people who are supporting him are now doing him a grave disservice, leading him to believe that this race is winnable for him and that he stands a chance of primarying Phil Scott out on August 14th. And speaking of Governor Scott, Stern is scheduled to debate him later this week. And the false sense of confidence that's propping Keith up is what's going to lead to an embarrassing spectacle Wednesday night. So to Mr. Stern, I implore you, do what's best for yourself, your family, and your bank account. Gracefully withdraw from your candidacy, mitigate your losses, and move on with your professional life. In the mailbag from this past week, Francis in Randolph writes, quote, Keith, it is really refreshing to hear someone who clearly doesn't give a damn about what the opposing team thinks. Your program is both informative and entertaining. Francis, I certainly appreciate your sentiments, and you hit on two goals in doing this show that I have, to inform and to entertain. And if I can introduce a third goal, yes, to royally piss off the progressives. And speaking of pissed off progressive leftists, Lelio, who left no city or town mentioned on a message on the YCN website, wrote, quote, who is this illiterate conservative liar of the facts? Who would give this fool airtime to promote more lies and fake news than Dumbo Trumpo? Get off the air, do some studying, and then you might find out the difference between the Republicans, that's his word, not mine, and in America, and those who actually understand compassion and why Republicans can't make or are making America a disaster. Good luck in the next election. Conservative degenerate ideals are going to be shot down in droves, and the pinhead in the White House can finally be locked up. Well, newsflash, Lelio, compassion is defined as, and I quote Merriam-Webster, sympathetic pity and concern for the misfortunes of others. Since you imply that you are the compassionate one, isn't it slightly hypocritical for you to belittle somebody who you feel is your intellectual inferior? My advice for you, Lelio, don't go off your meds anytime soon. That's going to do it for this week's edition of YCN Vermont Wrap. Thanks to Carlene Griggs Smith for joining me on the show this week. And as always, be sure to share with me your thoughts about this week's program. Please make a note of the new email address. That's khanson@ycnnow.com. That's khanson@ycnnow.com. Be sure to let me know your city or town as well. And be sure to follow me on Twitter @RealKeithHanson. That's @RealKeithHanson on Twitter. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody. Talk to you next week.